Добрый день.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexander Ostrogorsky. I am a professor at the Moscow School of Architecture, and we are going to discuss this topic, which is very important. It's spatial philosophy of technological corporations. We need to start, and we know very well that office spaces and the logic of office life has a huge impact and has had a huge impact in the 20th century on the way our cities look, not just the way we work and how we live and how we imagine our way of life. For example, such events in architecture as the appearance of glass skyscrapers, or especially after World War II, and now there are many of them in Moscow. They get more and more complicated, these shapes. They change the way the city look, and also such inventions as cubicles for offices where you put employees. All these events are the result of, on the one hand, some interests of a company, and on the other hand, that's how architects and designers respond to those requests, and all the way, and this is how all that is organized, and we can view that differently. We can look at it as an unavoidable evil, or some achievements, or something that actually hinder us, or something that we view as a limitation. It's easy to recall how in the early noughties or tens, the offices of technological companies and Western companies such as Google and catching up Russian companies, they began to impress visitors by their inner logic and freedom, and that's how this whole attitude to work started to change, and they began to think that they needed to treat work space differently and so on. And now we're going to discuss what's the next step going to be. Of course, technological corporations set the pace and tone of this entire process. They bring us technologies, but also organizational and management practices. What IT technologies can and IT corporations can give the city and change its way of life. And here we have Nikolai Kazansky, managing partner from Colors International Russia, Alexei Bogdanov, managing partner of CA Ricci, Dmitry Bulichkov from Sberbank, Christos Pasas, design director of Zaha Hadid Architects, and Amir Idiatulin, CEO of IND Architects. As we see, three of our panelists are connected by one story. It's usually a big company like Sberbank, which is turning into a high-tech company and develops its spaces, creating some new way of life for itself. But I'd like to start with the presentation by Nikolai Kazansky from Colors International Russia. Thank you, Alexander. Good afternoon. Our topic is quite broad on the one hand. On the other hand, let me tell you about three points that we need to know and that are going to be useful to you architects and our colleagues to understand better what's going on in the market of office real estate and what's happening with such companies as Google, Yandex, and others. There are many formats that are different from what we had 5 or 7 years ago. At the same time, we need to understand clearly what is viable and how to make it useful for your employees. My third point is this new trend, which is in between real estate, business offices, and these high-tech offices. This is what we call co-working, how we organize workspace in the world. In Moscow, we have 17 million square meters of real estate, including 2 million square meters that are vacant. So our market is quite active, and it's close to saturation. On the other hand, we have potential for growth. Out of 2 million vacant square meters, 500,000 of square meters are what we call systemic vacancy. In other words, something that could never be leased out. They could be the worst rooms in the buildings that nobody wants, or entire building which was poorly built, and we have quite a few of such buildings in Moscow. So our real vacancy is not 12%, like we say in our analytical reviews, but around 8%, and that's the level of London and Paris, level of major European office space markets. And any office real estate that comes to the market for IT companies, for oil and gas companies, they have to be of good quality, well built, well planned, and well managed. The management here is very important. It's not enough to just build one. These are common sense ideas, but people tend to forget about them. There's still demand for offices, but for high quality offices that get rented fairly quickly. As for high-tech companies in Moscow, we were closing this big lease deal with Yandex, 50 or 60,000 square meters. We understand what these big offices mean of these modern companies with employees from the Generation Y. Perhaps some time ago they wanted to work from a beach or from their country house, and that's what the company is offering them, hammocks and cafeteria. But Western Scandinavian experience tells us that there's no universal solution for all companies. You need to understand the psychological type of your employees, because it changes over time. We have an example of a company which did some research, and when they were moving to another office, they had several zones. One was a silent zone where people could just sit quietly without any phone calls, working on their computers. That was for some specific employees, which suit them better. Then there was this traditional open space when there's quite a bit of noise and talking. This is the open space that we got used to globally. Then they had this co-working zone where you have a lot of joint spaces for talking and integration. You can have some recreation and talk at the same time. It's not just some common space, but have some more things that unite you. And also a recreational lounge-like zone, like a co-working extension. And when you have your office divided into 4 zones, it turned out that each one could find the one that suits him better. And there are different proportions in different companies of such employees. Everybody talks about open space. You have to come up with creative spaces, hot desk. You want to work on this floor today and on the next floor tomorrow you are sit next to Alexei today and next to Alexander tomorrow, and you get some added value for the business process. But then a simple question: what if it's a huge office of 10,000, 50,000 square meters? How are you going to even find this colleague? There's no stationary phone, no stationary place for anyone, and there are simple answers to those questions. There was this experience when one company abroad equipped their passes with some sensors, and they have this smartphone application, and through that application and those sensors they're able to find a particular individual. And there's also information like this person is in the cafeteria queue, and the queue is 7 minutes long, and so we can turn from this potential chaos to some benefits from trying to find you a space in the parking lot or some place to work if there are no stationary workplaces, or help you find someone if you need this particular person, or on the contrary find a zone where there are fewer people, or what to do if there are several cafes at the building, and telling you where you have the least amount of people. And that's all for the benefits of employees and the company. I can talk a lot about that, and let me tell you about co-working a little bit. Overall, if we're talking about the latest trend in the development of office spaces and high-tech, highly creative spaces, many of you remember there was this company, Rebus. They were renting a floor or two in a building in Moscow, New York, or elsewhere. They repair it and sublet it by room. If I come to Moscow and I just want a small office, I can go to this company, rent from them, and I will have a phone there. I will just be able to bring my notebook, and I can use this secretary that I have and printer. In the past, that was the top of many people's dreams. Now we have a different example. Viborg that started some first co-working in Moscow. In 7 years, their capitalization is much more than that of Rebus, even though Rebus is 30 years old. What they do, they get this space for management, not just lease it. Or together with the developer or the owner of the building, they don't just make individual rooms, but they join some. They make some joint spaces where people, for example, from Generation Y want to work. If 10 years ago, Generation Y used to say we didn't want any open space, then they returned home. They grew older, and at home they have their mother-in-law or whomever, and they don't want to work at home, and so now they change their mind. It's not that comfortable working from a cafeteria or from a beach. They need some working space where people come to work. And these co-working offices, they are different from regular offices, and what from Rebus did is that they offer you the atmosphere where there's a lot of public space on every floor. They may have some beer or ping pong table, but at the same time, you're not renting a specific place there. Of course, there are different options. You can rent a room, or like they do in fitness clubs, you just show up and take the available space, and they enrich one another. They come up with new ideas, and viability of this concept has been proved by the fact that the biggest, fastest growing company was one of those companies. They got about 1 million square meters. They rented it from the market, and this trend continues. And there are other similar companies that we are at the threshold of a new development process. Moscow is no exception. Every month, every year, we'll be hearing more and more such ideas. And I wish that it would work fine, and all stakeholders in this process would make money and be happy. Thank you. Thank you. I want to speed up this discussion a little bit and catch up without asking questions. Let me now give the floor to our second presenter from this consultant clan or guild, Alexei Bogdanov from S.A. Ricci. When you called us a clan of consultants, that was good. Okay. In addition to what Nikolai said about the trends, what we see in Moscow is the continuation of European trends and global trends. One of the trends that is really present is automation, introduction of robots in many processes for many companies, and basically there's a reduction of demand for office space as such. In other words, for the employees who sit and do something at the table. Last year we finalized this deal for Ernst & Young, and they had this huge division which is called audit. They are automating it. There's no demand in that many people anymore, and there's no need for rooms, office spaces. In the past, those people had to stay at the office all day and audit something. Now it's done without or with lesser or smaller participation of people, and this trend is there. And in many companies, they are reducing the floor space that they're using for their offices. That's what we need to understand when we talk about vacancies and so on. Of course, one needs to expand the office space, and you need to use some of that space for some recreational activities for your employees. That's obvious. That's true, because people who have to go to the office, they spend most of their time there. And as we give people this comfortable environment at work, that's your competitive advantage as an employer. If you equip your office with, or better than what your employees have at home, they will be staying at work with greater enthusiasm, and they will be staying at your office longer, playing ping pong, but also creating added value for your company. IT companies started this trend, and it was quickly followed by advertising agencies and companies from other traditional sectors. We also talk about requirements of how big corporations and companies drive the office space market. Those that are at the forefront of the development, they keep formulating the requirements that office market has to correspond to. It's about your load and your planning. IT companies have always been the driver of this story. They set the criteria for something that was actually non-existent in the Moscow market. Now there are buildings that are up to the latest trends and technologies. They have everything that's cool in the world, and now Moscow has it all as well. work places, usually when there is an idea, everyone begin to test it and then take a few steps back, because this idea may not work very well in real life. And there are studies about flexible work places. A human being is a social and cultural unit that wants its own corner and designated place.
And if you change your place too often, then you are stressed because you fail to find your place, and you always have to run around with your laptop and with the papers, and thus your stress reduces your labor productivity. And as a result, you generate less value than you could if you had your permanent working place. So as an employer, you need to always analyze that and to weigh and see what would be more profitable for you, to have an agile working environment or a fixed workplace that would be empty, for example, 50% of the time. I cannot say that there is a solution that would fit all the situations, because it's not the case. And to add to what Nikolai I wanted just to add that to what Nikolai has said. If there are questions, I will be happy to entertain them. Okay, thank you. I will ask the question to Alexei then. You have now mentioned that the need in new office buildings in Moscow is not high right now, right? No, actually it's not the case. Moscow is a big metropolis. The market is giant, 17.5 million square meters, like 10 Finlands or 20 Estonias, and it's just one city. So the market is indeed giant. There is always something happening on the market. Someone is looking for something bigger out of the center. Someone is looking for something smaller in the city center, and so on. So there is always some demand. Regarding the new demand, the economy is not really growing. So where would the demand come from? Yes, my question is about the following. Moscow has a lot of territories that have not yet been developed, and there are some expectations related to the renovation project, because there will be some new areas where multifunctional centers could be created instead of residential buildings. And you, as experts who analyze and forecast what will happen on the market, what do you think? Will there be people who will build new buildings? Well, actually, almost no one is building anything right now. We are now having the lowest figures of office building development over the whole history of the office building market. If the economy grows, if the demand grows, the supply will also increase, because it's market economy. There is nothing new about that. People are not building offices right now, but I don't think that that's a good idea, because it's not a very flexible, elastic market. You understand that you have some demand, then you need to find a place to proceed to R&D and so on, and it will take at least 3 years. And in Moscow there are a lot of right locations. What I mean by right: new metro stations are being built, new railways are being built, including the ring railway, and that helps to discover new territories that previously were excluded from the city fabric. Now these new territories are in demand. And today we need to design the right buildings, the quality buildings in these right places. And in that case, even if the economic growth rate is just 1.5% per year, anyway, these new buildings will be in demand because the old buildings are gradually becoming obsolete. The requirements of the companies are also changing, and I think that today developers really need to think about that today, because it's a really good niche to design quality office buildings in the right places of Moscow, and thus in 2 or 3 years they will be able to rent them. I can say that on the one hand, as I have mentioned, we do have some demand on quality buildings and premises, and if we have a look at Moscow, the market is developed, it is close to being saturated, but these 17 million square meters per 12 million people, well, if we take Finland, there are 8 or 10 million square meters per 1 million residents. So Finland, strange as it may seem, is a country where one resident has quite enough office space, including babies, elderly people, and those who are not employed. So that's their market. Our economy is a bit different, of course, and it has not been growing for quite a while to compare with the growth rate in 2006-2007 that was quite high. Nevertheless, the market is absorbing from 500,000 to 1 million square meters. We are now at the bottom regarding the development of new buildings and putting them into operation, and some developers are saying indeed that we need to start constructing right now. So I think that there will be some new development projects within the next 6 months. There is some inertia on the market. During the crisis, huge office spaces were rented. When they were designed in 2012, 2013, everyone was peering into the bright future, but they had to put the building into operation in 2014, 2015 during the crisis. And there was indeed a huge amount of buildings that was to be put into operation during the crisis period. And there were some doubts about the survival of the Moscow city even. But now we see that the quality of these buildings are not very numerous, and they are quite competitive on the market. And of course there is economic growth, and we can make the respective calculations. But apart from that, we have the body of the iceberg that I or Alexei or colleagues often do not see or do not think about. There are a lot of offices of classes lower than A and B classes, like C class offices. These are former plants, for example, and so on. And there are some lenders there as well. And in 2008, the prices were around $2,000, but now they are around $1,000, and they are closer to the European rates. The market has become more affordable, and many are ready to move from low-quality office buildings to high-quality office buildings because the prices are more affordable, and people realize that it's not efficient to use obsolete office buildings. It's difficult to evaluate this market, but if we consider that we have 17 million square meters of offices, we see that this figure could be improved, and that could be an impetus for many years of the office market development. So I'm quite optimistic about that, but I would like to highlight that we need quality office buildings. And there are now 30% of vacant offices, but that's because of the poor level of quality. Thank you. I'd like now to give the floor to the representatives of one of the most optimistic Russian companies, Dmitry Pulichkov, project director of the Center for Technological Innovations of Sberbank. So what are the demands of a modern company looking with optimism into the future for office buildings? Alexei and Nikolai have identified subjects that are quite interesting for discussion. Perhaps you remember the Soviet film about an electronic boy, and that electronic boy was an example of robotization, and in Sberbank, robotizing and robotics development is one of the main trends. We are trying to replace humans by robots when it comes to basic operations. Speaking about real estate, speaking about office buildings, I would say that the demand on them is changing. We are replacing some jobs by newer ones using robots, and thus humans are more involved in the development of such systems that would later replace things that are now being done by humans. This is the Y generation, or maybe not the Y generation, but anyway, a new generation that lives in a new environment. They communicate more often, because before people were sitting in closed environments, and they needed to concentrate, and thus they needed to close doors for their workplace. But now people should work in teams together so that they could discuss things and create something new. As a result, technological companies are switching more and more to open space mode or co-working mode. Many have perhaps heard the term agile. This is the approach that many tech companies are now using to create new products, and thus more frequent communication helps to better respond to the challenges presented by the market and to produce quality products sooner. This is one of the main trends on the market observed in tech companies. It will probably develop further. And it is not always related to being relaxed or installing hammocks in the office or working on the beach. Actually, many people come to the Silicon Valley instead of going to beaches, because young people, the new generation, they want to achieve something, they want challenges, they want to create something, to realize themselves, and the new office spaces should provide them with that opportunity. They should unveil the potential of the workers and allow them to create something new within their team. So that's the trend we are now observing, and we are moving in that direction. 1 year ago, we opened a new agile office on Kutuzov Avenue, and people are working like that in that office. Nikolai has also highlighted that the office is becoming itself a functional robot. It does not need a lot of people to maintain it. And in our office, we have more and more biometric technologies. You don't need a pass, you just need your face so that the system lets you in. And we have this system in our office in the Kutuzov Avenue. The system knows my face there. And later we could develop even more complex systems that would allow to track where I am, my location. The offices are indeed becoming smart. Everything related to smart cities, smart homes, and smart offices is quite popular and very interesting as a business, including for banks. And I believe that these trends will determine indeed the development of the industry in the upcoming 5 to 10 years. And I think that we will witness the appearance of robot offices where people will create new things. That's my approach as a representative of a tech company. Thank you very much. I think that in the context of what we are discussing, But it is quite significant that we are speaking about Sberbank as a tech company, along with Google, Apple, and so on. Indeed, this is a sign of the time. Dmitry, I have a question to you. How do you evaluate the prospects in general and the prospects of Sberbank regarding the transfer of these small departments into a new mode of operation, almost without people? Perhaps we will not need any bank branches anymore in future because everyone will just be using mobile banking. Yes, that's an interesting question. That we have been actively involved in that over the last 2 years because people don't go often to the bank branches. Indeed, this trend will be reinforced. Soon you will have to come to the bank just once, just to leave your fingerprints and your photo, and then you will not have to come there. Now you need to identify yourself to proceed to some operations, but I think that in 5 years that will not be required, and the role of the branches is changing significantly as well. Before you had to take some paper with a stamp of the bank, otherwise you would not receive services in a different place. And usually people who come to branch today, they just come for communication. It's not comfortable for them to communicate with robot or receive remote services. They just want to communicate. On Monday we had a training. We went for an interview to Zvenigorod town in the Moscow region, and we spoke with people about that precisely. And I had the impression that when we are speaking about smaller towns of 30,000 people, 100 or 200 people, people don't have a lot of places to go there. And even McDonald's restaurants are quite popular there because that's just a place to spend some time. And I think that the bank branches will also perhaps transform into financial McDonald's. People will be able to come there to get a service, to have a cup of coffee, to use the bathroom that would be clean, and that would be a modern space where they could receive some valuable information about the financial services. They could increase their financial literacy, which is particularly relevant for older generations. And I think that most probably bank branches, not only those of Sberbank, will transform into that kind of something new. Alexei, you wanted to add something? Yes, I wanted to highlight that now everyone is thinking that everything will move into the application and the bank branches will not be required, but that is actually not the case. We are social animals, as we know. We need communication, and the pretext for which you come to the bank or to the post office will be different than now, but communication is necessary. People will come for communication, for education. That is crucial. In London Underground, for example, the ticket offices are robotized, and there have been ticket machines for 20 years there, but still there are ticket officers with humans, although it's not rocket science to purchase a ticket for a subway trip. But still, for many people, even this micro-communication is important. Some people are afraid of those robots and ticket machines. And I'm not only speaking about elderly people who have never dealt with such technologies. There is that among young people as well. So this communication function will always be relevant. And what will happen in banks or post offices, the content may be different, but people will still come there for communication at least. And I doubt that that would ever end. Okay. Thank you very much. So now we have been speaking about the branches and offices. Indeed, it would be pleasant to have a bank branch as a club. But let's now move on. I would like to give the floor to Christos Passos, representative of Zaha Hadid Architects. Let us speak about some different horizons.
Okay, hi everybody. I did come from London and I did stop by a person who sold me a ticket to go to the train because the machine that is usually faster lacks every sense of intuitiveness and positive intelligent thinking. So before we get to that level, I think we have a few more years of comfortable human-to-human communication. But what I prepared for you today is on the theme of the spatial philosophies of technological corporations, such as Sberbank, who is one of our more prominent clients. We've been working actually with technological corporations for a number of years now. And what I would like to start by presenting is one of these kind of master plans for a Silicon Valley type master plan that we designed in Singapore some time ago, where we used so-called parametric urbanism techniques to develop a very flexible occupational density distribution strategy to be able to give space and volume for different parcels of spaces that would eventually be developed by tech companies into office buildings for themselves. So in doing so, some of the techniques that we use is we check, obviously interconnectivity, closeness between different inhabitants, but also creating empty spaces such as parks, promenades, and other kind of external facilities and ways so that people can use outside of the office building. In China, on the other hand, development of office and mixed-use spaces has been very rampant in the last few years, and we have a lot of requests for mega projects, in a way, buildings of 200, 300,000 square meters, because of the big populations that they have to be housed, because the Chinese are also following a model where work and living and play can always kind of intermingle, so the buildings are not so monofunctional anymore. And of course, the demand and the challenges for these buildings, architecturally, tectonically, constructively, are much higher. And we are at a place where we begin to explore digital algorithmic techniques with talented designers in our office to be able to develop forms that correspond to these new challenges and these new demands by clients. So in this particular case here, in the Galaxy Soho, we have a project that is about 500,000 square meters of space, and it includes a hotel, it includes public promenades, shopping malls, and living units, as well as offices. And of course, this kind of mixity of users necessitates a kind of intuitive navigation system that allows people to find their way through these kinds of spaces without getting lost, without having to depend on signs, etc. So this space you would find is very fluid. The promenades are in key spaces, so they form avenues, and this kind of Pyrenean type spaces also allow for a kind of a three-dimensional visual connectivity and navigation through these types of buildings. Light and atria are some of the key drivers in these cases, because obviously having in big buildings the connection to the natural environment outside, to the ever-changing let's say, climatic conditions, it's important to keep the biorhythms of the whole population running. At the same time, that there is a sense of, again, of orientation in the movement between the spaces. And the outlook, as you can see in these 3 slides, how this kind of variability can give a new identity to these kinds of developments and move past the kind of anachronistic and stereotypical compositions that we have seen in the last century, which we believe are insufficient to deal with the contemporary problems that we have to face, such as overpopulation, such as easy communication, free circulation, and also the advent of technology, which becomes, in a way, also a kind of a layer, communication layer, which allows us to obtain a lot more information as we move through the day and through different kinds of spaces. Now, in the case of the Technopark in Skolkovo that we're designing for Sberbank, we've developed a project that is fairly simple, you can say, from an outside point of view. A project that is essentially a glass envelope of a series of 7 floors of very large plates that sits comfortably, we believe, in the landscape, and we generate the spaces for internal working as well as the spaces for the exterior landscape with the same architectural moves to allow people to use the inside and the outside of the building very seamlessly. The building volume is interrupted in particular sections by so-called winter gardens or greenhouses, if you like, that become at once places of external, internal temperatures, but at the same time they become breakout spaces with plantation where somebody can take a break from work, and they are intentionally, let's say, inserted into the fabric of the building to maximize the amount of penetrating light, while at the same time providing for spaces that are almost anti-office in a way and allow for those kind of moments of relaxation. The building is very high-tech. We're designing it to the highest level of specification, both in terms of glazing technology, but also in terms of structure, in terms of sustainability criteria. Just some key indicators that would help you understand what this building is about. We have close to 250,000 square meters of space here for 2 branches of the company. One is Tech, who are the kind of computer geeks who are producing software for the logistics of the bank, and also Sberbank, which is more the banking department. And these 2 groups are supposed to come together in one continuous whole. So we are building a project that is all glazed. It doesn't have any solid walls or surfaces to the outside. It has a deep plan. It's about 100 meters, 130 meters wide versus 270 meters deep. We can fit 3 London neighborhoods inside this building in footprint, or 1 residential Moscow quarter in one of these. And basically the whole of the inside is meant to be a very fluid interior that gets eroded, gets carved out, if you like, with a series of voids and atria that bring the light deep inside the building. Again, because we want people to have a close relationship with the outside environment, but at the same time to have a fluid appreciation and movement through these types of spaces. We're using, I'm not sure how we can make this play. There. maybe you can help me with playing this animation, please? So these are meant to be kind of algorithmically driven animations based on kind of gravity fields that allow us to develop spaces for people depending on the amount of density, the number of people that conglomerate in particular areas, and to create a kind of a terrain, a fluid terrain, where each one of the centers of those circles becomes a gravity center where people come together as a team to resolve particular tasks. And in this sense, the plan, I don't know if this animation can play either, but this is basically a kind of a time-driven animation where we're looking at the layout of the floor plan and we begin to estimate which areas of the building can actually be occupied in different areas so that we can use different spaces at different times, but at the same time to use all of the building all the time as the day kind of progresses. There is a kind of a notion of a rich mix inside this building, which means that cafeteria zones, gyms, sports facilities, a so-called central hub, which is occupied by guests, as well as corridors resemble a kind of a more organic ecology where people and machines and guests all kind of coexist in a very fluid, almost organic agglomeration. Some of the interiors of the spaces here with these very characteristic branching columns that signify particular spaces, but also the idea of using circular desk geometries to be able to enhance the idea of bringing teams together. My particular opinion on the issue of team making and team building in an office is that, of course, all the spaces that provide diversity, breakout, and alternative forms of working are all very desirable. But in the end, the key driver to the success of any creative organization is to enhance the potential of its people to make them creative and to make them collaborative so that the collective intelligence of the organization can grow to its maximum. You can have 10 individuals of, let's say, an IQ degree of 100 each, and the results of these people, if they're not collaborating, will be 100. But if you have a team that works as a team and there is no kind of individual isolationists and produces together, then these 100 people with 100 IQ will produce 1,000,000 points of IQ in terms of its resolution. And the reason I'm making this point today is because I think we're coming into the dawn of an age where our collective intelligence will be so much more in demand to understand problems that we cannot even yet verbalize. And we believe that with the testing that organizations like Sberbank and Google and other technological organizations make and enable, it gives us the possibility to find systems, tectonic systems, to bring collective intelligences together, human collective intelligence, to be able to resolve problems that we're still struggling with. Cancer, global warming, problems of overpopulation, how to solve conflicting migration problems, etc., that are so big that cannot be kept in the mind of one, but actually we need a community of people to be able to work. This is the kind of platform for creativity that we are speaking about. Certainly, our founder, Zaha Hadid, was a proponent of this kind of, let's say, philosophy. And in a way, we can think about, for example, an interesting statistic, and I will close off here. An interesting statistic that I heard recently is that video game players spend about 10 billion hours every year playing video games. Imagine if we could take only 1% of that time and channel it towards real problem solving, the amount of progress that we could instantly make on this planet just with the technology and the materials we have available to us. So going back to these architectural technologies and these ecologies that high-tech organizations such as Sberbank are producing these days, we believe that this human resource, these intuitive beings, I think we can all learn and produce a lot more than our machinistic counterparts if we learn how to tap into our natural and intrinsic capabilities. In office spaces, again, that promote this kind of both relaxation and activity and isolation and concentration at the same time, and also using technology to serve us as a means of finding our way through spaces, finding our colleagues, meeting in this kind of agile environments, who is where, so that we can go have a chat. And by doing this, we can create beautiful buildings, but also beautiful creative economies that can help us to solve the problems that we are facing today. And that's my bit.
Спасибо большое. Дмитрий, вы
Thank you. Did you want to add something, Dmitry? This project was introduced to us, and now we are trying to discuss how we are going to live in it. That's an amazing project. Many colleagues are looking forward to how much longer to wait. I think it will take a while. I think it's 2020, 2021. 2021, well, that's not too long. Thank you for your story, Christos, and we will hope that pretty soon, when we discuss classes of office buildings, we will have, and when we set the price for them, they will be using coefficient of IQ of people who work in them. But let me give the floor to another architect, Amir Idiatulin. He is CEO of ING Architects. They work with Sberbank as well. They have just finished their agile office. Let's hear about how it works. Let me make a few comments to the presentation of our brokers first. Do we need to build new buildings? Yes, we do, because we all know that some companies send their employees back to the offices, but I mean back home, but Intel wants them back at the office now so that people could work together and generate some new products, ideas, and that joint work is more efficient. And what people can do on their own, very often that can be replaced by machine thinking, or they can just work at home just as well. One of our projects for Sberbank at Kutuzovsky Prospect, we did this new office, a new way of organizing work based on the agile system. And one of the key reflections there, observations there was that office is an ecosystem. An office is not just a place where we work at our computer. An office is where we work together. And here we as architects need to offer different options to organize workspace. It's not just a place for communication, it's also where we change pace. And in modern offices, there are some bright, interesting spaces where people can have some distraction, some recreation. Our brain needs to switch tasks. Einstein played the violin, and he sort of switched to another activity, but his brain subconsciously sort of continued to work on his mathematical problem and found the solution. That's how modern offices work. They allow you to switch to another task. This is our Sberbank office layout plan. This is like when you use around the office, and the whole space is mobile, and you can organize different processes. And here on Instagram, you can see how people are using scooters, or they take pictures and all at the same time work on innovations. And one of the metaphors here was that it's an arch at the Sokolniki Park, and this is how we got inspired by it and came up with this presentation space. And they use many patterns from the life of the city, and office is no longer associated with something boring. It will be more creative. And I always enjoy, after the end of the project, watching how it continues its function, whether the architects were right, whether the building was built correctly, technologically. And we can see here that both the client set the task correctly and the architect was able to catch the mood of the project. And it's important for the office to reflect the emotional state of the company, because it allows you to attract employees who associate themselves with the company. I think it's highly important as you work on space to understand the nature of the company and organize this design and planning so that in the future it would be easier for companies to hire and retain this Y, X generations and so on.
That's it. Thank you very much. So I would ask the two architects to answer the following question. It is clear that an office building that is built is always about cooperation with the customer and with the customer's interests. How do you think what exactly in this work can bring something to the city as a whole?
I think these projects where large organizations are being analyzed and spaces are created for them are actually very fertile grounds of beginning to understand proto habitats where large groups of people can be brought together, and the principles of those architectonic engagements can also in many ways be used in the cities, whether we speak about circulation or navigation or a certain sense of clustering and densification. I think these are in many ways, and in very simple terms, also urban design techniques that can be used to develop parts of the city as well.
Well, I think that in general it is crucial to involve the communities in the design. Very often architects face the following challenge. When they create a product, then it is perceived negatively by the city or the customer. I think this is the result of the non-involvement into the design of the community. So not just the customer, but also the future users of the space should be involved. I think that is crucial indeed to create an interesting, convenient, comfortable solution. Thank you very much. So it's time for us to finish. Summing up what has been said, I wanted to share my take from that discussion. I think it has been an interesting discussion, and there has been an attempt to imagine the work in the future. Using the words of Churchill, we are building buildings, and then the buildings organize us. So it's about transferring the office practices into the organizational practices and the practices of organizing the urban environment and the cooperation and interaction in the urban environment. And we have identified some things to expect. Communication plays an increasing role. Everything is becoming finer and more flexible, focusing on the psychotype and needs of a specific company or a specific person. We have mentioned the applications that will help you to find your colleague in the office, for example. If we have a look at all that in terms of the vectors of development of humans and cities, I think that it opens quite interesting prospects for us. The ways of organizing the office and living space proposed in the middle of the last century have been quite important for the last 50 years, but the second half of the 20th century has been dictated by the skyscrapers that are beautiful, but the spaces there are similar no matter what the company who occupies these offices is. So let us see what we will witness in the future. In 15 minutes, the session about the key projects of megacities and metropolitan areas will take place here. We have now been presented some Zaha Hadid mega projects already, and in the Moscow hall at 5, a plenary with the participation of Marat Husnulin and Mikhail Men will take place. So we are ending now. Thank you very much for your attention.